But in the world of acquisitions, closing is oftentimes just the start of the next chapter. And so today I really wanted to walk into what does the first few days of an acquisition look like and what sellers should expect in this process between the hustle and bustle and that last thing of days of closing, moving into what's life in the next phase.
Hello, and welcome to this week's Shoot the Moon podcast, broadcasting live and direct from Revenue Rocket World Headquarters in Bloomington, Minnesota. As you might know, Revenue Rocket is the world's premier M&A advisor to IT services companies. With me today are my partners, Matt Lockhart and Ryan Barnett. Welcome, guys.
Thank you, Mike. Hey, Ryan. We are at the end of the road of what has been just I think a lot of fun, super informative. Ryan, great idea. The end of our first Masterclass, right?
We're getting there. This is, if you think of where we've been, we walked through the decision to sell, kind of getting your house ready, understanding the value of your firm, and what you take home and the value of that firm. We talked a lot about what kind of team you have around you and what that first month looks like, including the go-to-market launch. Talked a bit about finding buyers, and we talked about that process of getting indications of interest and letters of intent. And then we talked a bit about deal structures and how to survive due diligence. Ultimately, in last week's episode, really getting to the point where a definitive agreement is done, signed, and you have closed. But in the world of acquisitions, closing is oftentimes just the start of the next chapter. And so today I really wanted to walk into what does the first few days of an acquisition look like and what sellers should expect in this process between the hustle and bustle and that last thing of days of closing, moving into what's life in the next phase. And so we've got a few more just kind of thoughts after this, but really think for this post-close day one. And Matt, Mike, let's get us going. We've closed. What really matters in the first 30 days of post-merger integration?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ryan. I mean, first of all, stability is key, right? You're going to want to make sure that you got the team over, that there's excitement about moving forward, that your customers are informed, that they didn't learn about your deal, hopefully via email or in frankly, in a press release. Your largest clients, most key clients in your acquisition, whether you're a seller or a buyer, need to be notified. Likely need to be notified by you if you're a seller, pursuant to you have a relationship with them, and you have to ideally communicate that to them both together with the buyer, and let them know what to expect. I think how you message that, how you do outreach to them, and how they learn about that is super critical. And I would say the same thing occurs with your team, right? The team needs to know that you're moving their cheese right now. So understanding what that means for them and their future and why 1 + 1 = 3 and how this should generate new opportunities for them, all super critical. So really protecting revenue, people, customer confidence, establish the leadership cadence, control the narrative early with both customers and employees is super, super important.
And Mike, I want to talk about one thing, and it'll feel like a little bit of a diversion, but we've learned enough and seen this enough time that sometimes the psychology of the sale can be hard for people to accept. And it can be an owner of getting through that. Actually, it's what I've got for our next podcast is really thinking through owner psychology in this whole process. But sometimes just employees and when they learn about the transaction. Many deals in our space are an asset transaction. And what happens in an asset deal is employees are actually terminated the day of the close, and they're almost always rehired the same day. And that causes a bit of shock, maybe, and maybe that's the right word. Matt, I just want to understand, that there's a bit of a legal process here of why we do it, but how can a leader make sure that their employees know that this is happening, and even though there's this formality of this termination, how should they get through that gracefully?
Yeah, Ryan. I mean, it's both a buyer and a seller situation, and I'll say opportunity as opposed to say problem, right? But yes, so often at times, as you say, an asset sale versus a stock sale can be the best route to take, and legally in those scenarios, you need to go through this process of rehiring. And so to your point, it can be a shock, right? And oftentimes it's like, whoa, wait a second, what's going on? I think that the more that you've planned accordingly, your communication plan, and then sort of calmly and matter-of-factly explain the process and educate the team members, all the while reassuring them how valuable they are, right, to the organization, and then start to move into the sort of the excitement of the opportunity moving forward because of the change. In any scenario of change, and obviously something like this is a little bit bigger, communication is obviously the most important thing. And, it was taught to me way back when that you really need to say something, at a minimum like 7 times in a communication plan, better even more, right? So it can burn in and there's consistency and you're building trust at a time when, people can feel a little maybe exposed or just wanting to know what's going on.
Hey, I've been through this, and I remember getting a termination letter in one hand, quite literally, and an offer letter in the next. And it's an interesting scenario. You realize that there's a lot of potential in the company that's coming, and that in some ways a chapter is closing. But as long as you look at that going forward path of what the opportunity creates, I think it can be really something very exciting for employees and customers and the market overall. And Mike, I'd love to know, what should employees know first? What should customers hear within the first week of an acquisition?
Well, it's really about rationale, right? Why the deal happened, what's going to be better, what stays the same, where the reporting lines are now and where they may change or not. Certainly doing proactive top account outreach is material and important. It may even be part of your representation on warrant as a seller that you're going to bring over so many clients. Because understand, what people buy, they have to understand that, and it has to be stable. Otherwise, if there's attrition in your book when you close the deal, which by the way isn't common if you handle these communications properly, you're going to get nicked most likely as a seller, even post close. So, critical that this communication stage works, and certainly customers want to know. And I think it's both customers and employer want to know, what the rationale was and why this is better for them. And I think it requires a little bit of selling, but I think positioning the real rationale for why this was done. You wouldn't have done it if it didn't line up strategically, culturally, and financially. So, those strategic and cultural decisions can be shared here. And I think it's something that should be highlighted both for employees and for customers.
Sure. And as once you start letting employees know and customers know, there's also just the bigger approach of letting the market know. And so, Matt, I'd love to know, when you think about those communication steps, how should CEOs communicate to the broader market after an acquisition, and what are a few things they should consider?
Well, beyond employees, and, there's a personal decision, but obviously, Mike, you talked about it before. Employees, job number 1. Customers, job number 2, right? And so oftentimes people are like, well, our customers will understand, and they need to hear from you, and they need to hear from you consistently with a clear message. And obviously it's a positive message about the future. But that's key. And then what are the next steps to your customers, right? Vendor partners, lead sources, et cetera, and a priority line down there. And I think that, again, it's this idea of consistency in sort of a matter of fact way, but then obviously real positive about the future. And it can't be the exact same, message every time that you're delivering it, but there is a consistent through line. And then again, what is the scheduled and variety of means in which that communication is going out? And so, well done. And I've done this a number of times personally. And what you find is that when it's well managed like that, you've got a whole new opportunity to communicate with your customer and listen to them and see how you can continue to add value and really grow your business almost immediately.
Right, and it's an opportunity to signal to the market where you're at and where you can be. So you can focus on the growth of the combined business. You can be an opportunity for recruiting and to be part of something bigger. And there's great opportunities to bring people in at the right time, just because of that acquisition. So there's some great growth opportunities that can come with it when you're on either side of the table here. If I switch gears here a little bit and the deal's done, you've communicated out to the market, it starts to come into what the next kind of first 100 days look like. And Mike, when two IT services firms are integrating, what do they need to tackle first, and what should be aligned first, and perhaps what are a few things that should wait to change?
I think what's really important here, Ryan, is that integration planning should begin ahead of time, right? And you need to understand what's critical and what's not post-close. And, in many ways, what's not immediately critical is, long tail systems, if you will. What's critical right away is certainly billing and cash flow, right? But when we start thinking about, PSA and RMM migrations and integration and, other software systems, you need to do that in a very mindful way so you're not disrupting your ability to service your client base. And so you want to protect service delivery and the customer experience. And you want to be able to bill for your work, and you want to be able to collect that money. Those are priorities. How you sort of eliminate redundant systems and integrate them should be seamless to the customer, and it should be behind the scenes. Same thing for employees, ideally. I mean, this is going to take some work, but it should be, for the customer-facing staff, it needs to be simple, and ultimately needs to not disrupt their ability to their job. And so having a mindful plan about how this works and prioritizing the customer experience and cash flow are critical.
Yeah, the journey is going to be quite some time. So to your point, focus on those billing and cash flow first, careful with the changes, and you can eventually get to a optimized company over time. If I think about the CEO or the founder or the person who sold their firm on day one, that's a pretty monumental change on life before an acquisition and to it, especially for founders, which we work with often. Matt, what changes should a founder expect on day one?
Sure. First and foremost, hopefully a very positive one where you're able to take a deep breath, right? Because it's the end of a journey, end of a chapter. Everything, as we hear from all of our clients at the end of the day, falls on the founder of the business. And that's a lot of responsibility, and et cetera, et cetera. And so really a deep exhale. And congratulations and celebration. And then also understanding it is a new chapter. There's a bit of identity shift sometimes, and almost always that we hear from our clients that they go through a period of a bit of remorse, loss, right, if you will, because of the change. And so, real practically, obviously, if you continue on with the business, there's a new reporting relationship. You have a boss again. Oftentimes the role itself changes, can narrow in scope. Not everything is on a founder anymore. And so it's sort of that emotional adjustment, relief and celebration and adjustment to the new chapter. So all the time. And part of it really goes back to being well prepared and having it thought through, working with your advisor. What does it mean to sell in and continue forward? And so it's less of a shock and just more of that adjustment.
Right. It is such an adjustment, and you've got an ordinary amount of influence here, and being it's going to be a big change, but when you do this right, I think we can have exponential returns. And then, Mike, just kind of last couple of questions here, but where do founders kind of unintentionally derail post-merger integration? Where can things go wrong in this first critical time?
Well, I think mixed messages are certainly a huge issue as it relates to one set of messages to staff, one set of messages to clients. I think there can be some redundancy, right? Or too many cooks in the kitchen. And, that can create a shadow leadership scenario where, remember that most of the team members you have on your team, if you're a seller, are there because of you, right? Now there's a new sheriff in town, and transitioning that relationship can be challenging. It has to be handled at an appropriate cadence. Because either you're taking likely a new role in the combined entity or you're working your way out. And when that occurs, there needs to be new reporting relationships established and a new sort of main message from the leadership. So, I think there's also a potential risk with, there could be customer resistance. And what does that mean? And how are you involved in that? And, how are you reselling them on the new vision with the new buyer? And so, you need to manage those communications carefully, because when somebody raises their hand and says, hey, I'm not happy or I need to understand, you need to respond to that effectively. And then there's the whole issue of attachment to legacy systems. Oftentimes when deals get done, systems change. And you hear a lot from employees of the new business that were part of the old business. Hey, these used to work really well when we use XYZ system, and now your system is sub-optimized and it doesn't work as well. And we're frustrated and we don't know how to manage that. And so, I think at the end of the day, you really need to be in strong alignment with your buyers and align privately and support publicly, right? Critical stuff in your ability to keep your integration initiatives on the rail.
Right. You can misstep here. And so to your point, watching the messaging, the reliance on old systems, you got to make sure that alignment's there. That's a great point, Mike. And then, Matt, if I was to look ahead a bit here, and the deal's closed, we've gone through day one. If I think 100 days from now, what kind of things what had to happen in that first 100 days to make this a good deal?
Sure. Let's call it the key performance indicators of a good start in integration and transition. Yeah, I can't say it enough. Stability in the ongoing operation. You're not making major changes. You're not making major changes that are going to, really impact service delivery and customers or your team, right? And so you're focused on employee retention You're focused on minimizing or having zero client churn, right, in that first 100 days. If you've done those two things well, in and of itself, boy, you've given yourself a whole bunch of breathing room, right? And can't just, stress it enough. Communication is at the heart of all of that. Now, obviously, adjusting to all of the new reporting relationships, you feel as though you've set up that new stream of communication within the new organization, so people have clarity in terms of what the reporting relationships are and the processes that they're supposed to be working within. And again, common sense says you can't make too much change because people aren't going to be able to adapt at that rate. And then, overall, right, it's a one team, scenario, right? And after 100 days, you've really made the start towards being, you're all on the same team and you know where you're going. And you're starting to row the boat in the same direction at the same cadence, versus the other end of the spectrum is you see us versus them. Well, that's those guys. That's how they do things. And this is how we work and blah, 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 right? That's the worst case scenario, because obviously that's going to impact your customers. So focus on those customers, focus on those employees, manage change, and over communicate.
Yeah, makes sense. That was a kind of last formal question that I had, Matt. I appreciate you answering that. Mike, I'll turn it over to you. Any kind of closing thoughts, and let you do what you do.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Ryan. Yeah, this is a good topic. I think, thinking through this, if you're contemplating a transaction, feel free to reach out to us. We can provide some good advice and counsel on that, and are happy to do it in our role as an advisor, and would welcome the opportunity to talk through some of these things with you directly. We can be reached at info@revenuerocket.com or via our website. So feel free to fill out a form, and happy to get back in touch. And with that, we'll tie a ribbon on it for this week's Shoot the Moon podcast. Look forward to having you tune in next time as we continue to wind down a few of these sessions in our Masterclass. And with that, make it a great week. Thanks.